greatest heartbreak of your life was actually the beginning of something extraordinary? What if betrayal, the kind that shatters everything you believe in, was just a doorway to something even better? Amber Carter never imagined that the man she trusted most would be the one to break her heart. She never thought she'd wake up one day, look at the life she had built, and realize it had all been a lie. But life has a way of surprising you. Sometimes the deepest pain leads us to the most unexpected second chances. Sometimes walking away is the first step toward finding something real. How do you rebuild yourself after everything falls apart? How do you trust again when love has failed you once before? And most importantly, how do you know when it's time to open your heart again? Amber's story is one of heartbreak and healing, of loss and redemption. It's a story about the power of resilience, and the truth that good things always find those who refuse to lose themselves in the pain. Stay with me until the end, because the answer to one of life's greatest questions lies within this journey. Can true love still find you, even after the deepest betrayal? The night air was thick with the scent of whiskey and cigarette smoke, the low hum of conversation filling every corner of the dimly lit bar. Amber Reynolds sat in a corner booth, absently tracing the rim of her glass with a manicured finger, her gaze unfocused. It had been years since she'd found herself in a place like this. A bar packed with rowdy laughter, clinking glasses, and the lingering ache of regret. But here she was on a Friday night, surrounded by colleagues she barely knew, nursing a bourbon she didn't particularly like. She had always hated the idea of drinking alone, but tonight wasn't about drinking. It was about drowning out the thoughts she couldn't escape. A sudden crash echoed across the room, silencing the chatter. Amber turned her head just in time to see a man stumbling backward, his face pale, his hands raised in surrender. "Honey, please, it's not what you think," he pleaded, his voice thick with desperation. His wife stood across from him, her chest heaving, fury burning in her eyes. A collective hush fell over the bar as the woman lifted her hand and delivered a resounding slap across his face. The sharp sound cracked through the tension like a gunshot. "You lying piece of garbage," she spat. "Do you think I'm stupid?" The man's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. He knew he'd lost. The woman's voice wavered, the anger barely concealing the raw pain beneath it. "I gave you everything. I trusted you, loved you, built a damn life with you. And you throw it all away for some cheap thrill." Her voice broke on the last word and she shook her head. "You disgust me." Then, with one last searing glare, she turned on her heel and stormed toward the door. A hush followed her, the weight of her heartbreak palpable in the thick, smoky air. Amber watched, unmoving. Something about the scene hit too close to home. The way the woman's shoulders trembled, the way she clenched her fists like she was holding herself together by sheer force of will. The way her world had just collapsed in front of a crowd of strangers. The bar door swung shut, and just like that, the moment passed. The conversations resumed, the music played on, and people went back to their drinks. Except Amber. She sat frozen, her pulse hammering in her throat, memories clawing their way to the surface. "Why do they always say that?" Michael, one of her co-workers, asked, his voice pulling her back. He leaned in, addressing the small group gathered around their table. "Every single time a cheater gets caught, they say, 'It's not what you think.' Like, do they have a manual or something?" Helen, the woman sitting across from him, raised a brow. "Do what?" Michael rolled his eyes, taking a sip of his beer. "Deny everything. The second they're caught, they act like their spouse is the crazy one." Amber exhaled slowly, staring at the condensation pooling at the base of her glass. "I don't think it's about denial," Helen said thoughtfully. "It's about control. If they can convince you that you don't know what you saw, maybe you'll doubt yourself. Maybe you'll give them another chance." Michael scoffed. "Or maybe they just don't want to deal with the consequences." Amber remained silent, the conversation swirling around her like white noise. She knew exactly why they said it. She had heard those very words once before, spoken by a man she had loved with every fiber of her being. "Amber!" A gentle nudge snapped her out of her reverie. Holly, another co-worker, was looking at her with concern. "You okay?" Amber forced a smile. "Yeah, just lost in thought." But the truth was, she had been dragged back to a moment she had spent months trying to forget. 15 months ago, she had been that woman in the bar, standing in the ruins of her marriage, watching the man she trusted betray her with the same breath, He used to swear he loved her. She had given Daniel Reynolds 16 years of her life. They had built a home together, weathered storms, celebrated victories, and mourned losses. She had stood beside him through layoffs, through his father's funeral, through the nights he came home late from work, exhausted and defeated. And she had believed him when he said he loved her, when he said she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. Until the night she came home early and found the discarded trail of clothing leading up their staircase. Her hands had trembled as she climbed each step, her mind racing to find an explanation that wasn't what her gut already knew. Maybe he was changing into pajamas. Maybe he had spilled something on his shirt. Maybe. But then she saw them. Daniel. And the woman he had sworn was just a friend. They hadn't even noticed her at first. He was too busy whispering something against the curve of the other woman's neck, too lost in the warmth of someone who wasn't his wife. Amber had stood there, frozen in time, her heart slamming against her ribs so hard she thought it might shatter. And then Daniel had turned, his face draining of color the second he saw her. Amber, wait. It's not what you think. Those 5 words had severed 16 years of love and devotion like a blade through silk. Amber had left that night, packing a suitcase and walking out the door before she could even process what had happened. She had expected him to fight for her, to come after her, to beg for forgiveness. But he never did. The next morning, she returned to gather some of her belongings, but he was already gone. His side of the closet empty, his toiletries missing from the bathroom counter. By the end of the day, she had received an email from him. Not a call, not a knock on her door, just a damn email. It had been concise, apologetic, full of empty words about how he never meant to hurt her, about how things had been complicated. She hadn't replied. Instead, she had accepted the job transfer that had been sitting in her inbox for months. She had packed up her life, moved across the country, and started over in a new city where no one knew her as Daniel Reynolds' wife, where no one knew the way her heart had been torn in two. Now, sitting in this bar, listening to the echoes of another woman's heartbreak, Amber realized something she hadn't let herself acknowledge before. She wasn't over it. She wasn't healed. And no amount of distance or time was going to change that, because some wounds don't fade. Some scars never truly disappear. And some betrayals, no matter how much you try to forget them, still haunt you in the quiet moments when you least expect them to. 15 months earlier, on a crisp autumn evening, Amber Reynolds had left work early. A migraine had crept up on her during her afternoon meetings, tightening around her skull like a vice. She had planned to stop at the pharmacy for medication but decided against it, eager to get home, take a hot shower, and curl up in bed before Daniel returned from his business dinner. She had called him around noon to let him know she wasn't feeling well, and he had responded with the usual concern, telling her to rest and that he would be home late. "Don't wait up," he had said, his voice smooth and reassuring. "I love you, sweetheart." At the time she had believed him. Amber pulled into the driveway of their 2-story colonial home in Raleigh, North Carolina, and noticed something odd right away. Daniel's car was already there. A strange pang of relief and confusion washed over her. He had told her he'd be home late, but maybe plans had changed. Maybe the dinner had ended early, or maybe he had skipped it altogether to take care of her. Her heart softened at the thought. She stepped out of the car, shaking off the lingering headache, and made her way inside. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of music coming from upstairs. The scent of Daniel's cologne lingered in the air, mixing with something sweeter, perfume. Not hers. A cold unease prickled at her skin. She called his name. No response. Amber set her purse down on the entryway table and walked toward the staircase. That's when she saw it, the first piece of evidence, lying on the bottom step like a discarded secret. A red high-heeled shoe. Her breath hitched as she took another step forward. Further up, a woman's scarf, draped carelessly over the banister. Another step. A dress, black and slinky, pooled on the hardwood floor at the top of the stairs. Amber's fingers curled into fists. 1,000 rational explanations battled in her mind, but none of them could justify what she already knew in her gut. With slow, deliberate steps, she moved toward their bedroom, her pulse roaring in her ears. The door was ajar, the flicker of candlelight casting moving shadows against the hallway walls. Then she heard it. A soft giggle. A moan. The kind of sounds that had once belonged only to her and Daniel. Amber didn't remember pushing the door open, didn't remember stepping into the room. But suddenly she was there, standing at the threshold of her own life unraveling before her eyes. Daniel was in their bed, tangled in the sheets with another woman. His back was to her, his head buried in the curve of the stranger's neck, his hands gripping her waist. The woman was laughing, whispering something in his ear. It was intimate, effortless, like this wasn't the first time. The air was sucked from Amber's lungs. For a second she couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't even comprehend that this was real. Then Daniel turned his head and saw her. Everything stopped. His expression shifted from pleasure to pure, unfiltered panic. "Amber!" he gasped, scrambling to sit up, reaching for the covers. The woman, oblivious, pressed a kiss to his shoulder before following his gaze. When she saw Amber, her eyes widened in shock. Amber barely registered the woman's face. She was younger, blonde, a little too perfect. The kind of woman Daniel always claimed he had no interest in. "It's not what you think," he said, breathless, desperate. Those 5 words. The same 5 words that every unfaithful person seemed to grasp onto as their last defense. Amber felt the world tilt beneath her feet, but she refused to fall. Her fingers trembled at her sides, her stomach churning with rage, hurt, and something else, something colder. Disbelief. Because the man in front of her wasn't just her husband. He was the person she had trusted more than anyone in the world. The man she had built a life with, made sacrifices for, planned a future alongside. And now, in a single moment, he had shattered it all. She exhaled shakily. "Really, Daniel?" Her voice was eerily calm, detached even. "Then please enlighten me. What exactly am I thinking?" He stammered, opening and closing his mouth, searching for an answer that didn't exist. Amber's eyes flicked to the woman. She looked guilty but not apologetic. She didn't cry, didn't beg for forgiveness, because she wasn't the one who had something to lose. That was Daniel. "You should go," Amber said to the woman, her voice quiet but firm. She hesitated, glancing at Daniel. "Now." Without another word, the woman gathered her dress from the floor, slipped past Amber, and disappeared down the hallway. For a long moment Amber just stood there, staring at the man she no longer recognized. Then she turned, walked down the stairs, and left. She didn't slam the door. She didn't scream. She didn't give Daniel the chance to spew any more lies. She simply walked away. And she never looked back. The next morning, she returned to collect her belongings. She had expected some kind of fight, some attempt from Daniel to win her back. But when she arrived, the house was empty. His closet was half empty. His toothbrush was missing from the bathroom counter. Just like that, he was gone. And somehow that hurt worse than anything. She had spent 16 years believing they were unbreakable, that their love was different, stronger. But in the end, he had walked away like she was nothing more than a chapter he had already finished reading. An email arrived in her inbox later that afternoon. "Amber, I don't know what to say. I never meant for you to find out like that. I never wanted to hurt you. Things have been complicated for a while now, and I should have handled it better. I'm so sorry." No explanation. No begging. Just empty words. Amber had stared at the screen, waiting for the anger to come, for the pain to sink in deeper. But all she felt was numb. She closed her laptop, stood up, and walked into the bedroom to finish packing. By the end of the day, she was on the road, leaving behind the only life she had ever known. Raleigh had been home for over a decade, but now it was nothing but a graveyard of memories. She had already made up her mind. She wasn't staying. A week later, she was settling into a new apartment in Nashville, Tennessee, far away from the ghost of Daniel Reynolds, far away from the broken woman she had been. But as she sat in the dimly lit bar 15 months later, watching another woman's world collapse, Amber realized something painful and undeniable. She had left Raleigh. She had left Daniel. But she had never truly left the past behind. Because no matter how far she ran, no matter how many miles she put between herself and the betrayal, the scars were still there, buried deep beneath the surface. And she wasn't sure they would ever fully fade. Amber Reynolds had spent the first 6 months in Nashville keeping to herself. She had thrown herself into work, filling her days with back-to-back meetings, deadlines, and endless spreadsheets. Work was predictable, controllable, unlike life, which had a cruel way of unraveling when you least expected it. Her colleagues had been polite but distant at first. They sensed something guarded in her, an invisible wall she had built between herself and the rest of the world. She wasn't unfriendly, but she wasn't warm either. She was simply there. And then there was Logan Carter. Logan had been one of the first people she met at the company's regional office. He worked in marketing, confident and charming, with a sharp wit that kept meetings from feeling too dull. But what set him apart was his ability to see people, not just the version they presented to the world, but the parts they tried to hide. For the first few months, he had kept his distance, respecting the boundaries Amber had so carefully put in place. But every now and then, he would make small attempts to draw her out, asking about her weekend plans, offering to grab coffee, making casual observations about the world that invited her to join the conversation. She resisted at first, but Logan was patient, and slowly, against her better judgment, she found herself lowering her guard. Started with small things. A smile that lingered a little longer than necessary. The way he would lean in slightly when they talked, giving her his full attention. The easy way he made her laugh, real laughter, not the polite chuckle she had mastered over the years. And then one Friday night everything changed. It had been a long, grueling week, the kind that left everyone drained and in desperate need of a drink. Amber usually avoided office gatherings, but for some reason, when Logan casually invited her to join the team for a round of drinks, she didn't say no. She told herself it was just one drink, 1 hour. Then she would leave. But the bar was warm and filled with laughter, the kind of place that made you forget why you were so determined to keep people at arm's length. Logan sat beside her, nursing a whiskey neat, his gaze flickering to her every now and then as if gauging whether she was truly comfortable or just pretending to be. "You ever going to tell me why you're so guarded?" he asked, tilting his glass slightly. Amber raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold question." "I'm a bold guy," he said, smirking. She considered brushing him off, retreating behind the safe wall she had built. But there was something about Logan, something steady, unwavering, that made her want to tell the truth for once. "My husband cheated on me," she said, the words falling from her lips before she could stop them. Logan's expression didn't change. He didn't flinch, didn't pity her. He just took a slow sip of his drink and said, "His loss." Amber let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The conversation shifted after that, moving to lighter topics, movies, travel, the absurdity of office politics. But something had changed. Logan wasn't just her coworker anymore. That night, as he walked her to her car, the autumn air crisp and cool around them, he paused and turned to her. "You deserve to be happy, Amber," he said quietly. "Whatever he did, whatever he made you feel, it doesn't define you." She swallowed hard, nodding but saying nothing. Then, in a move that surprised even her, she leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Logan." She slipped into her car before she could see his reaction. But when she glanced in the rearview mirror, he was still standing there, watching her drive away with something unreadable in his eyes. The next few weeks were different. Logan didn't push, didn't pressure. He let Amber set the pace, meeting her where she was rather than trying to pull her into something she wasn't ready for. They started having lunch together, sometimes just the two of them, sometimes with the rest of the team. The conversations grew longer, the silences more comfortable. And slowly, Amber felt herself beginning to heal. It wasn't a sudden thing. There was no grand epiphany, no moment where everything clicked into place. It was gradual, like the first hints of spring after a long, brutal winter. One evening, as they sat outside a cafe downtown, sipping coffee and watching the world pass by, Logan spoke. "I'm not asking you to rush into anything," he said, his voice careful. "But I'd like to take you out. A real date. Just dinner, no pressure." Amber hesitated. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to let herself have this. But the ghost of Daniel still lingered, whispering doubts in the back of her mind. "Logan," she began, searching for the right words. "I know," he said, smiling gently. "You're not ready yet." Amber exhaled, relieved that he understood. "But you will be," he added, taking a sip of his coffee. "And when that day comes, I'll still be here." She blinked, caught off guard by his certainty. He wasn't asking for promises. He wasn't asking for her to be anyone other than who she was. And for the first time in a long time, Amber felt something close to hope. It took another 2 months before she was ready. They had spent the day at a company retreat, forced into team-building exercises that involved trust falls, awkward icebreakers, and a scavenger hunt that Logan had been entirely too competitive about. By the time they returned to the city, the sun had set, casting everything in a warm golden glow. Amber glanced at Logan, who was driving with one hand on the wheel, the other draped casually over the console between them. "Dinner," she said suddenly. He glanced at her, amused. "What about it?" "You asked me on a date once," she said, her voice steady. "I think I'm ready." Logan didn't smile, didn't make a joke. He simply nodded, as if he had known this moment would come all along. "Then let's do it." They went to a quiet little Italian restaurant tucked away on a side street, the kind of place with dim lighting and soft music, where conversations felt private and unhurried. Amber was nervous at first, but as the night went on, she found herself relaxing, letting go. And when Logan reached across the table, his fingers lightly brushing against hers, she didn't pull away. She squeezed back. A small step, but the beginning of something new. Months later, as Amber lay in bed, tangled in Logan's arms, she realized something. She had thought love was supposed to be grand, sweeping gestures and dramatic declarations. But real love, the kind that lasted, was built in the quiet moments. In laughter over burnt pancakes on a Sunday morning. In the way he traced lazy circles on her back as she drifted to sleep. In the simple, unwavering truth that he had waited for her. That he had seen her, broken and hesitant, and chosen her anyway. And for the first time in a long time, Amber Reynolds wasn't looking back. She was looking forward. And she was finally truly home. Amber Reynolds had spent the past 6 months learning what it meant to be happy again. She had learned how to wake up without the weight of the past pressing down on her chest. She had learned how to laugh, how to let go, how to stand in the kitchen on a lazy Sunday morning and dance barefoot to an old country song while Logan cooked breakfast. She had learned that love wasn't supposed to be painful, that trust wasn't something to be questioned every time the phone rang, or when a late meeting kept someone at work longer than expected. She had learned what it meant to be loved by a man who had no intention of breaking her. And just when she had finally begun to believe she was free of her past, it showed up at her doorstep. It happened on an ordinary Thursday evening. She had just gotten home from work, kicking off her heels and changing into one of Logan's old sweatshirts. He was supposed to be coming over soon, and she had planned to open a bottle of wine, order takeout, and settle into a quiet night. But then the doorbell rang, and when she opened it, her past was standing right in front of her. Daniel. For a moment, she thought she was imagining it, that somehow she had conjured him from memory, brought him to life just by thinking too hard about all the ways he had once hurt her. But he was real. He was standing there in her doorway, looking almost the same as he had 15 months ago, except now he seemed thinner, his face a little more worn, like life had chipped away at the arrogance he had once worn so easily. "Amber," he breathed, like he hadn't said her name in years. She didn't move. Didn't blink. She just stared. "Can I come in?" he asked. A bitter laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it. "No." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. "I know I'm the last person you want to see right now, but please just let me talk." Amber crossed her arms over her chest, leaning against the doorframe. "Talk then. Right here." He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I know I don't deserve your time, but I needed to see you. I needed to tell you that I'm sorry." Amber felt something in her stomach twist, but she didn't let it show. "You're sorry," she echoed, her voice carefully even. "I am," he nodded. "For everything. For the way I hurt you. For the way I left." He exhaled, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I've spent the past year trying to figure out how I became that man. How I let you slip through my fingers." She clenched her jaw, willing herself to stay composed. "And what did you figure out, Daniel?" He looked up at her, his blue eyes familiar but no longer safe. "That I was a fool. That I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me. That I loved you, still love you, and I'll never stop." The words should have meant something. Once upon a time they would have broken her. But now they felt empty. like an echo of something that had died long ago. Amber shook her head, letting out a slow breath. "You don't get to do this," she said softly. "You don't get to stand here and tell me you love me. You lost that right when you chose her." Daniel flinched. "It wasn't." "Don't say it wasn't what I think," she cut him off, her voice sharp. "I know exactly what it was. You lied to me. You betrayed me. And then you left without a fight." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I left because I thought it was what you wanted." She laughed, the sound hollow. "You didn't leave for me, Daniel. You left because it was easier." Silence stretched between them, and then he said the words that made her stomach drop. "I want another chance." She stared at him, stunned into stillness. "What?" Daniel took a step closer, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his coat. "I came back for you, Amber. I know it's too much to ask, but I had to try. I had to tell you that I've changed." Amber's fingers curled around the doorframe, gripping it like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Do you think that matters to me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think I've just been sitting here, waiting for you to come back and say you're sorry?" Daniel's eyes darkened. "Do you still love me?" The question hit her like a slap. Did she still love him? She had loved him once, so fiercely, so completely. She had loved him with every breath, every heartbeat. But that love had been built on the belief that he would never hurt her, that he would always be the man she had trusted. And the moment he had betrayed her, that love had cracked into 1,000 pieces. Could love survive betrayal? She had asked herself that question 100 times in the past year. And standing here now, looking into the eyes of the man who had once been her whole world, she finally knew the answer. "No," she said, her voice steady. "I don't love you anymore." Daniel exhaled sharply, his face unreadable. "Amber." "Leave," she interrupted. "Go back to wherever you came from, because there is no place for you in my life anymore." He hesitated, his gaze searching hers, like he was looking for some sign that she didn't mean it. But she did. So finally he nodded. And just like that, Daniel Reynolds walked away. Amber stood at the doorway long after he had gone, her heart pounding, her body trembling with the weight of what had just happened. She had thought seeing him again would break her, that it would drag her back into the past, reopen wounds she had spent so long trying to heal. But instead she felt free. The past no longer had a hold on her. She had survived it, and she had come out stronger. As she closed the door and leaned against it, a single thought ran through her mind. She had loved Daniel once, but now she was finally ready to love someone else. And when Logan arrived 20 minutes later, carrying their usual takeout order and flashing her a knowing smile, she realized something. For the first time in a long time, her heart was light, because she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Amber stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. The woman looking back at her was different from the one she had been a year ago. Stronger, wiser, unburdened by the weight of betrayal. Daniel's return had shaken her, but it hadn't broken her. Instead, it had given her clarity. She had made her choice, and for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace with it. And then there was Logan. She hadn't told him about Daniel's visit yet. Not because she was hiding it, but because she needed time to process it on her own. She needed to be sure that the words she had spoken to Daniel, "I don't love you anymore," were true. Now she knew they were. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her phone and texted Logan. "Can we meet tonight?" His reply was almost immediate. "Always. My place or yours?" Amber smiled. "Yours. See you soon." Logan lived in a house on the outskirts of town, a place that felt far enough from the city to be quiet, but close enough to still feel connected. Amber had always loved his home. It was warm and inviting, filled with little details that spoke of who he was. A framed ticket from his first baseball game, a well-worn leather couch that he refused to replace, a bookshelf overflowing with novels he swore he'd read someday. When she pulled into his driveway, he was already waiting on the porch, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "Everything okay?" he asked as she stepped out of her car. She nodded, walking up the steps and taking the glass he offered. "Let's sit," she said. They settled onto the porch swing, the night air crisp around them. For a moment, Amber just listened, to the rustling of the trees, the distant hum of crickets, the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. Finally, she turned to him. Daniel came back. Logan's grip on his glass tightened slightly, but his face remained calm. When? Yesterday, she said. He showed up at my door. His jaw twitched, but he said nothing. He was giving her space to explain, letting her lead the conversation. Amber exhaled. He said he was sorry, that he made a mistake, that he wanted another chance. Silence stretched between them. Then Logan spoke, his voice careful. And what did you say? She turned to him, meeting his eyes. I told him no, that I didn't love him anymore. Something in Logan's shoulders relaxed, but he didn't speak. He just watched her, waiting. Amber set her wine glass down and reached for his hand. I wanted to tell you because I don't want there to be secrets between us. But more than that, I needed you to know that I meant it. I'm not looking back, Logan. I'm here. With you. He let out a slow breath, then lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. Good, he murmured. Amber smiled, feeling warmth spread through her. It had taken her so long to get here, to this place where she could look at a man and not see the ghost of her past lurking in the background. But with Logan, there were no ghosts. There was only now. From that night forward, something shifted between them. They had always been close, but now there was a new certainty in their relationship. A quiet understanding that neither of them needed to rush, but that they were both walking toward the same future. And for Amber, that future felt brighter than anything she had ever imagined. One afternoon, they took a drive out to a small vineyard an hour outside the city. Logan had insisted it was the perfect way to spend a Saturday, and Amber hadn't argued. They wandered between rows of grapevines, glasses of wine in hand, the sun warming their skin. So, Logan said, nudging her playfully, I heard a rumor about you. Amber raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah. He smirked. Apparently, you're really bad at three-legged races. Amber groaned, rolling her eyes. Who told you that? Your boss, Logan laughed. He said you and Claire were partners at last year's company picnic, and you both wiped out 3 times before you even reached the halfway point. Amber covered her face with her hands. It was awful. Claire tripped first and I went down with her. Then we tried to stand up too fast and fell again. It was humiliating. Logan chuckled, setting down his glass and pulling her hands away from her face. Sounds adorable. Sounds like a disaster, she corrected. Well, he said, we're definitely doing it this year. Amber narrowed her eyes. You just want to win. Logan shrugged, grinning. I do enjoy winning. Amber shook her head, laughing. You're impossible. He leaned in, pressing a kiss to her temple. And yet, you like me anyway. She sighed dramatically. Yeah. They walked a little longer, sipping their wine and soaking in the moment. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, Amber realized something. She was happy. Truly deeply happy. Not just because of Logan, but because of her. Because she had made the choice to move forward. Because she had let herself heal. Because she had finally learned how to live again. And when Logan took her hand and spun her around under the golden light of the setting sun, she let herself laugh. Because for the first time in a long time, life felt good. One evening, as they lay on Logan's couch, half watching a movie, he turned to her with a thoughtful expression. Move in with me. Amber blinked. What? He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing lightly against her skin. You spend most of your time here anyway. You leave clothes in my closet. Half of my kitchen cabinets are filled with your tea. She bit her lip. Are you sure? Logan smiled. Amber, I'm in love with you. I want to wake up next to you every day. I want to argue about what to watch on TV and cook dinner with you and fall asleep with you in my arms. I want all of it. Her heart ached in the best possible way. She had spent so long being afraid of love, afraid of trusting the wrong person again. But Logan wasn't the wrong person. He was the right one. She swallowed hard, then nodded. Okay. His smile grew. Yeah, she whispered. Logan pulled her into his arms, kissing her softly. And just like that, Amber Reynolds took another step forward. Toward love. Toward a new beginning. Toward the life she had always deserved. Amber stood at the edge of the field, her fingers clutching the soft lace of her wedding dress. The early evening sun bathed everything in a golden hue, casting long shadows across the sprawling meadow. A light breeze rustled the tall grass, carrying with it the distant sound of laughter and music. This was it. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding with something that felt like a mix of joy and disbelief. Just a year ago, she had been picking up the shattered pieces of herself, convinced that love was nothing more than a cruel illusion. And now here she was standing in the middle of a wildflower-filled field in Tennessee, about to marry the man who had shown her that love, real unwavering love, was still possible. "Are you ready?" Claire, her maid of honor, whispered beside her. Amber exhaled a soft laugh. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." Claire smiled and gave her hand a gentle squeeze before stepping away. The music shifted, the soft strumming of a guitar blending with the gentle hum of the summer wind. And then just beyond the rustic wooden archway adorned with white roses and eucalyptus, Amber saw him. Logan. He stood at the altar, looking impossibly handsome in a tailored navy suit. His blue eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. He had never looked at her with anything less than admiration, but tonight, there was something even deeper in his gaze. It was love, the kind that stayed, the kind that never wavered. As she walked toward him barefoot in the grass, the world seemed to fade into the background. The past no longer mattered. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the nights spent wondering if she would ever feel whole again. It all led to this. To him. To them. When she finally reached him, Logan took her hands in his grip warm and steady. "You look incredible," he murmured. Amber smiled. "You're not so bad yourself." Their guest chuckled softly, but in that moment all she could see was him. The officiant began speaking, but Amber barely heard the words. She was too busy memorizing every detail of this moment. The way Logan's thumb traced gentle circles against her wrist, the way the sun glowed behind him, casting his silhouette in warm light, the way her heart swelled as he looked at her like she was his entire world. And then suddenly it was time for their vows. Logan cleared his throat, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Amber," he began, "I never believed in fate before I met you. I thought love was something you had to chase, something you had to fight for until you were too tired to keep going. But then you walked into my life, and you showed me that love isn't supposed to be a battle. It's supposed to be home. You are my home. And today, I promise to spend the rest of my life proving to you that I will never take that for granted." Amber felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she didn't bother wiping it away. She took a breath and spoke, her voice softer but just as certain. "Logan, for a long time I thought love was something fragile, something that could be broken so easily that it wasn't worth holding on to. And then you came along and you taught me that real love isn't fragile at all. It's strong. It's patient. It's the kind of thing that stands the test of time no matter what life throws at it. You are my second chance, my greatest gift, and my best friend. And today, I promise to love you for the rest of my life." Logan's jaw clenched slightly like he was holding back tears. The officiant smiled. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Logan, you may kiss your bride." Amber barely had time to breathe before Logan's hands were on her waist, pulling her in. His lips met hers in a kiss that was slow, deep, and full of every promise they had just made to each other. Cheers erupted around them. The sound of clapping, laughter, and the distant popping of champagne corks filled the air. But all Amber felt was Logan, and for the first time in years she felt completely, perfectly whole. The reception was a blur of dancing, heartfelt toasts, and warm embraces from family and friends. Twinkling string lights wrapped around the barn beams, casting a soft glow over the rustic wooden tables set with wildflower centerpieces. The air smelled like barbecue, vanilla cake, and warm summer air. Amber sat beside Logan at the sweetheart table, leaning into him as he draped an arm around her shoulders. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. She turned to him, her smile soft. "More than I ever thought possible." Later that night, as they danced under the stars, Logan leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "Come away with me," he murmured. Amber pulled back slightly, raising an eyebrow. "We already have a honeymoon planned." He smirked. "I know, but I mean more than just the honeymoon. Let's take a road trip when we get back. Just you and me. No plans, no deadlines. Just adventure." Amber bit her lip, considering it. The thought of leaving everything behind, even just for a little while, was exhilarating. "Where would we go?" "Anywhere," Logan said. Everywhere. Amber laughed. That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters, he countered, grinning. She shook her head, smiling as she pressed her forehead against his. Okay, she whispered. Let's do it. Logan's hands tightened on her waist. You and me against the world, Mrs. Carter. Amber's heart fluttered at the sound of her new last name. She leaned in, her lips brushing against his. Always. Their honeymoon was everything she had dreamed of. Long walks on the beach, stolen kisses in candlelit restaurants, lazy mornings tangled in hotel sheets. But it was the road trip afterward that truly changed everything. They drove down the California coast, stopping in small towns where no one knew their names. They hiked through redwood forests, swam in hidden lakes, and sat on the hood of their car at night, watching the stars stretch endlessly above them. One evening, as they watched the sunset over the Grand Canyon, Logan reached for her hand. Do you ever think about how different life would be if we had met sooner? He asked. Amber thought about it for a moment before shaking her head. No, she said. Because if we had met sooner, I wouldn't have been ready for you. Logan studied her, then nodded. Me either. Amber squeezed his hand. But I'm ready now. He smiled, lifting her fingers to his lips. Good, he whispered. Because I'm never letting go. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Amber knew without a doubt that she had finally found the love she had always deserved. And this time she wasn't afraid to hold on to it. Amber sat on the porch swing, the soft creaking of the wooden slats beneath her adding to the gentle symphony of the summer evening. Fireflies danced in the yard, their golden flickers matching the glow of the lanterns strung along the edge of the porch. Logan was beside her, his hand resting on her knee, his thumb absent-mindedly drawing small circles against her skin. They had been married for nearly 10 years now, but in many ways it still felt like their love was brand new. I think we should build the treehouse this summer, Logan mused, his gaze fixed on the sprawling oak tree at the back of their property. Amber smiled, sipping her iced tea. You think the boys are finally old enough to appreciate it? They've been begging for it since last fall, he chuckled. And I have to admit, I kind of want to build it for myself too. She laughed softly, shaking her head. Their two sons, Henry and Caleb, were 7 and 5, wild and full of endless energy, always running through the fields, collecting bugs and dreaming up grand adventures. Logan was right. A treehouse would be perfect. Life had become a beautiful rhythm. Slow mornings filled with laughter and coffee, long afternoons tending to their small vegetable garden, and evenings spent watching the sunset from this very porch swing. Amber exhaled, leaning her head against Logan's shoulder. Sometimes I think back to that version of me who thought she'd never have this. Logan pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I do too. He paused, his voice turning quieter. And I think about the version of me who almost let it slip away. Amber turned her head slightly, looking up at him. You never would have let me slip away. He met her gaze, his blue eyes as steady as ever. No, he admitted. I wouldn't have. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind of comfortable quiet that only comes with time, trust, and the deep kind of love that doesn't need to fill the air with words. Then from inside the house a tiny voice called out, Mommy, Daddy. Amber smiled as she stood, setting her tea down on the small side table. Sounds like Caleb. Logan grinned, following her inside. Sounds like trouble. Their home was a place built on love, filled with warmth and the small imperfect details that made it uniquely theirs. The scuffed wooden floors marked by years of tiny feet running across them. The refrigerator covered in colorful finger paintings. The bookshelves stacked with everything from classic literature to Logan's ever-growing collection of mystery novels. As they stepped into the living room, Caleb was standing on the couch, his curly hair wild from playing outside earlier, his little hands holding a crumpled piece of paper. Mommy, look, he said, shoving the paper toward her. Amber knelt down, taking it from him. She unfolded it, her heart swelling as she saw a wobbly drawing of their family. Stick figures with oversized smiles, standing next to what she assumed was their house. Henry, their older son, stood nearby, rolling his eyes. He made you really big, he muttered. Caleb pouted. She's the most important, duh. Amber laughed, pulling both boys into her arms. Logan crouched beside her, ruffling Caleb's hair. It's a masterpiece, Bud. Caleb beamed. I made it for your office, Daddy, so you don't forget us when you go to work. Logan pretended to look serious. Forget you? Impossible. But I'll hang it up anyway. Amber watched them, her heart full. This was what love looked like. Not just the grand, sweeping moments, the wedding, the adventures, the passionate declarations, but the small, everyday ones. The ones that came in the form of messy drawings, shared laughter, and quiet nights on the porch swing. As the years passed, life continued to unfold in ways Amber had never dared to dream. The treehouse was built that summer, with Logan and the boys hammering away under the warm Tennessee sun. It became their sanctuary, a place for whispered secrets, late-night campouts, and long afternoons filled with pirate battles and astronaut missions. Amber's career flourished, though she always made sure it never overshadowed the life she had built at home. She found balance in ways she once thought impossible. She no longer felt the need to prove herself, to fight to be enough. With Logan, she had always been enough. Their love grew in new ways, too, deeper, steadier. It was no longer about butterflies and stolen glances across crowded rooms. It was about knowing each other's rhythms so well that words weren't always necessary. It was about weathering storms together, about trusting that no matter what, they would always find their way back to each other. And then one autumn evening, a new chapter began. Amber stood in their bathroom, staring down at the pregnancy test in her hands. 2 pink lines. Her heart pounded. They hadn't planned this. They had always talked about having more children someday, but life had kept them busy, and they had settled into the chaos of raising 2 boys. She wasn't sure why she was crying, but she was. Logan found her a few minutes later, stepping into the bathroom and immediately sensing that something was different. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. She turned to him, her breath catching. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, his lips curved into a smile. A huge smile. "Are you serious?" She let out a soft laugh, nodding as the tears spilled down her cheeks. Logan pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly that she could feel his heartbeat against her own. "God, I love you," he murmured. She laughed against his chest. "Good. Because we're about to be outnumbered." Their daughter, Lily, was born on a crisp spring morning. She was small, delicate, and had Logan's piercing blue eyes. From the moment Amber held her in her arms, she knew this was the final piece of their family. Life became even busier after that. There were sleepless nights and chaotic mornings, school drop-offs and soccer games, scraped knees and bedtime stories. But through it all, there was love. The kind that stayed. The kind that grew. The kind that, years from now, when Amber and Logan sat on that same porch swing, old and gray, would still feel just as steady as it had the first time Logan held her hand. One evening, many years later, Amber found herself in the kitchen, preparing dinner while the sounds of laughter echoed from the backyard. She glanced out the window, watching as Logan tossed a football to their grandsons, while Henry and Caleb stood nearby, teasing each other like they always had. Lily sat on the porch, reading a book, her long golden hair catching the evening light. Amber smiled. This was it. A life she had once thought impossible. A love she had once feared she would never find again. She stepped outside, walking toward Logan. He turned to her, a knowing smile on his face. "Thinking about how lucky you are?" She laughed, slipping her arms around his waist. "Actually, I was thinking about how lucky you are." He chuckled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "No argument here." Amber exhaled, sinking into his embrace. The past no longer haunted her. The future no longer scared her. Because right here in this moment, surrounded by love, laughter, and the family they had built together, she had everything she had ever needed. And for the first time in her life, she truly, completely believed in happily ever after. Life has a way of proving that kindness, integrity, and resilience are never in vain. Amber's journey is a testament to the idea that even in the face of betrayal, those who hold on to goodness will always find their way to something better. Her story reminds us that pain does not define us. How we rise from it does. The choices we make, even in our darkest moments, shape the life that unfolds before us. When Amber chose to walk away from deception instead of becoming bitter, life eventually led her to a love that was real, unwavering, and deeply fulfilling. This is the power of karma, the universal law of cause and effect. What we put into the world, whether it's honesty, love, or forgiveness, will always find a way back to us. Logan, too, was someone who had faced his own regrets and mistakes, but his willingness to be patient, to love Amber without conditions, was what made their happiness possible. In the end, their story was never about revenge or dwelling on the past. It was about trusting that life rewards those who stay true to their values, even when the road is uncertain. Do you believe that good things come to those who remain kind, even after experiencing betrayal? Have you ever been in a situation where life eventually rewarded you for staying true to yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear your experiences.